Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so happy to be back here this week. We're talking tonight with Sensei Angel Lemus, and as you know, with our new format, we're going to jump right in and get into some meat right now. Sensei, I have a question that I'm really excited to ask you, and I know that Hanshi Legacy might want to chip in a bit too. This is the first time we've had someone that I'm aware of as a guest who isn't with an organization who's deep into Kojo-ryu. And we know that that's a family style going back to the 1700s. And then the name goes all the way back to one of the 36 Chinese families in Okinawa in 1392. So can you talk a bit about that style and how directly influenced it is by the Chinese families and how that integrated with Tode?
Wow, that's a great question. First thing is, I don't know everything about Kojo-ryu. Most of what I've learned is from Chris Hoshiyama Sensei. He studied in Okinawa with Sensei Yabiku for about 10 or 11 years, and he would travel there every year. But what I can tell you about the system, I found it very interesting because I read about it first in Mark Bishop's book. I think it was in 1996 when he came out with Styles and Secret Techniques, Teacher Styles. And it was like, wow, this is like the oldest style. And I was intrigued because I'm always looking to go in a time machine as far back as possible to study things. The older the system, the more interested in it I am. But then I found out, well, I'd have to move to Okinawa. I'd have to hunt these people down, find where they are, and see if they'll accept me. But so I just forgot about it. And in 2013, Hoshiyama Sensei saw in the initial run of Bugeisha, issue number 7 had his teacher, Tayaka Yabiku, on it. And he contacted me. He said, hey, is there any way I can get a copy of this issue? And I happen to have one. I said, I'll send it to him. And he sent me an email. And in his email, among the things that he studied, says Kojo-ryu. And I said, this must be a misspelling. It's like, I don't know anybody who studies or knows Kojo-ryu. So I contacted him. And sure enough, he told me the story. And I said, well, I'm interested. Can we do this? So I made several trips to Phoenix, where he lived, and he came to Hawaii a couple times. But what I found very interesting in it is that it's a very soft style. Let's say it's 70% open hand. A lot of punching is a vertical fist, much like you see in Zenryo and other styles or Chinese styles. So I find that it has a very Chinese flavor to it. And that fit me very well because I've always enjoyed Kung Fu and practiced several styles over the years, and I'm still involved in it in one degree or another. And then the forms were very, very different. It wasn't, the forms are not the typical, for example, you have Seisan and you have Shinto and Wansu across most of the Shorin type of styles. But all these forms were completely different. And there's 6 initial forms, 3 of them, the Fist of Heaven, Fist of the Sky, and Fist of the Earth. These are 3 fundamental forms. And then the other 3 forms are the White Tiger, White Crane, and White Dragon. And that's pretty much the entire system. But there's a lot of information that has been lost over the years. But one of the cool things for me was that Hoshiyama Sensei was very, very forthcoming and knew a lot of the applications to the forms, which is something that I've always looking for. That unfortunately, with my background, where I started in Seibukan, there wasn't a lot when it comes to principles of what's underneath the kata or the form, and what did the movements mean. All the bunkai applications, principles of movement. And he was just like a walking encyclopedia. So you would ask him about any movement, he could explain, a basic way, a variation way. And what I found that there's a lot of different, many different strikes that you typically, I don't think you would see in like, for example, the Shorinjiryu that I did. So it was a very fascinating study. I'm still playing around with it and trying to dig deeper into it.
So do you think that would be a pretty straight lineage all the way back to China through those families?
Oh, absolutely. It's because it bypassed the occupation of Okinawa by the Japanese. They just sort of stayed stayed within their own compound. And then when karate opened up to the world in the 1920s, when the Meiji Restoration happened and everybody had to, Kyan became a he pulled carts and collected chickens. The stipend from the king ended, but the Kojo family was pretty wealthy. They had a wine or sake business, and they just basically stayed doing their thing. And it wasn't until like the early 50s where they started to teach it to one or two people outside the family. So it stayed within the family. So they had records of who was who and who came before. And we recently found a document that goes back generations in China, but it had nothing to do with martial arts. It had to do with the occupation of being like an accountant or somebody who kept records. And it had the name of the Kojo family, which in Chinese would be like Sai. So it would be CSI or TSI. That would be the Chinese pronunciation. So it's the sad thing is that today you have Shingo Hayashi in Japan, who did some training with Kafu Kojo, who is the last patriarch of the family, and he's over there doing his thing. But there's really nobody in Okinawa that's actively teaching. The kids or the family can't find them anywhere, as far as I know. So it's basically almost on the brink of extinction.
So I know in the United States you could talk to
Hoshiyama.
Anthony Sandoval.
Well, him too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Sensei Legacy's teacher. Yeah. And actually, Kafu Kojo offered him a 99-year lease in Okinawa if he wanted to stay and train with him, because you can't own property there. But Kafu Kojo said to Sandoval, "I'll give you a parcel of land for 99 years if you want to stay here and keep training." That's
fantastic. And I have to apologize. I did completely forgot about Sandoval Sensei. Yeah, so he had contact, with the Kojos early on, and there were a few people who trained with Yabiku Sensei, who, to my knowledge, are no longer involved.
Yeah, I think there was a dentist who went blind at one point too. That's since Sandoval. He moved to mainland Japan, was a dentist, eventually lost his sight, and he was supposedly high ranking in that system as well.
Was he Okinawan?
He was Okinawan originally, yeah.
And then Sensei Dauphin Hanshi, you two saw the style, you tried the style a bit with Hanshi Sandoval, or he just suggested he could and you stuck with the white crane. Can you remind me, Hanshi Legacy?
I believe that Randy knows Kojo Brother Katas. When I first went to him, I was looking for the Matsumura Hakatsu, because he said it was a minor style, in agreement with George Alexander, right? And we're just being honest about it. He tried to steer me towards Kojo Brothers, and he showed me some differences, etc. I think we learned some katas. Did we not, Randy?
I know, yeah, two Sensei. We know two Kojo-ryu katas.
Yeah. And so that's as far as I got as well. But Sensei Sandoval knew, he taught us others that I had forgotten. I myself had forgotten because I took some lessons from him by myself. There were others, I'd forgotten them. There was that one series of 3, and you might have been right about the tiger, the crane.
Yeah, actually, I think Sensei Legacy, he taught us once the tiger kata at a camp as well. So 3, I think, from my perspective. You probably learned other ones in private lessons, but.
So I have a question for you, Sensei Lemus, and then I have a question I want to go around the room with before we do our big intros. You said something really interesting. The older the style, the more interested you are in it. And I'd love to ask you about that. Why is that? What is it that does for you?
The older it is, the more application there was to the daily life of people who practiced it back in the day. you were more likely to use it. You were more likely to have to live under conditions that your life depended on it. Today some of us train in martial arts and we think we're at least partially prepared for some crazy situation, but for the most part, modern day civilization, you do your thing. You're a carpenter, you're an architect, but you don't think about warfare or self-defense. You think that the police is going to protect you, or the law enforcement, but we all know that they usually are there to clean up the mess, but they don't really offer protection. But it's just also just in my experience, the more I saw karate, I'm 62, so I kind of grew up in the 70s, and I saw the growth of karate in the US, and very excited, but it was point sparring or that kind of stuff. But I always saw that, well, it's got too many limitations and rules. It's a sport. So I'm always looking for the things that are like, well, real fighting, the things that you have to do to survive in a real situation. So that's sort of like always been because I was spoiled. When I started in judo, and I learned real quick, there's no faking a point in judo. You're slammed on the floor, you're choked out, or you have your arm about to be busted, so you better be tapping out. So I learned that in judo, there's no make-believe. There's no, there's no subjective opinion. So if you're judged by four corner judges, three of them may not have seen your point, and one, and then there's a discussion. Whereas in real life, you would have knocked the guy out, and then there's no discussion. But we can't do that in a civilized society. But judo taught me that lesson. And then when I started training in karate, which I went into the American Goju of Peter Urban in the early 80s in Miami, Florida. I was a nobody, and they threw me to spar with all these second, third degree black belts, and I didn't know anything about sparring, but I knew judo. And I quickly found out that all I have to do is cover up, and if I grab them, that's it. I owned them. And I was like 17 years old, and these guys are in their 20s and 30s. So they had no idea what it was to fight close quarters. So it was a revelation. It's like, oh, this is cool. I mean, I eventually learned how to kick and punch and play that game, but my survival instinct was to just, you grab and you grab them. They didn't know how to pull their hand out, from a judoka's grip, because we learn in judo when you grip, it's like a vice grip. You don't let go. So that was an interesting thing. So my whole thing was like, these guys are pretending that they're fighting, but they're not. But when I fought in judo, boy, it was rough, and it was real. And you have to really know good technique. You couldn't just muscle your way in there. So that's I found that the further back you go, they had to do this stuff for real. So I would want to learn from a 17th century sword master, or or something like that. If we could find one these days, that would be a different experience than somebody today.
They're on the call.
Let's get their number.
I was really excited to hear your answer, but I really love what you just said. I wrote down a lot of things right there. And then the thing I want to go around the horn on, to back up on something you said about the Kojo family, the style, the potential for extinction. Now, I'm not talking about this style per se, because that's something that's, dear to people on the call. But when a style just happens to diminish, my sort of philosophical question for everybody, and I'll start with you, Sensei Suino, and then you, Sensei Dauphin, you, Hanshi Legacy, and we'll finish with you, Sensei Lemus. Does it matter if the odd style and the odd flame goes out? Sensei Suino?
Well, it matters as a martial arts historian. I think it matters on a practical basis. I mean, look, let's just be honest. If you look at some of the old jujitsu styles that a few people still practice in Japan, some of them have some core techniques that are really solid, but there's so much stylistic stuff. Sometimes they're kind of funny. So I guess it depends on the art that's going away, right? Evolution, right? Darwin has a way of getting rid of the weak, and I think in one way that's true in the martial arts too. So to the extent that a martial art is is interesting because it has unique principles or it's effective, then I think it would be a loss, and that folks that are interested in history should preserve it. To the extent that it's absurd, you know, personally, I don't mind if it goes away.
Sensei Dauphin?
Listen, I do Shorinjiryu Karate Jitsu, Legacy Shorinjiryu Karate Jitsu. I do Mukuso Jigden Ishinryu Yaido, and most recently I do BJJ. I care very deeply about those things. I think there's similarities in other things that I don't know about, but it doesn't really matter to me practically.
Right.
And then, as Sensei Suino said, I'm also a historian. I went to school for history. So it matters to me, to posterity, but not to my practicality when I stand on the sidewalk, right? Like I've chosen the systems that I'm pushing forward and that I want to keep moving forward and that I think are valuable. I can't value all of them the same way. And I'm not even going to try.
Hanshi Legacy?
Well, we live in a martial arts world, and in a martial arts world, you need different worlds. You know, it's sort of like grain of sand on the beach. You know, well, the martial arts world represented by the beach. You need a lot of different styles to cover most things. Not everybody says something. So again, depending on how many are legitimate classical styles, if you look at it in that particular point of view, then it does make a difference. In my opinion, it makes a difference. Like just because a master dies, you know, like Yabiku or something, not Yabiku, he's not that dead. Matsumura, say for instance, if you forget about that art, you're going to be losing some things. That's all I mean.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Lemus, what do you think?
I agree with the points that Sensei Suino made and the rest of you also. But sometimes it dies not because it's not worth it, it's because of just the conditions, like, you know, the species around the world, they go extinct, not because they didn't have value, but sometimes the conditions of their survival are no longer there and they just go, even though it could have been a great thing to keep. A master dies and he didn't spend time teaching students, so when he goes, it goes with him, and that's sad. But whether a style evolves into something else, as long as the things that are valuable for myself as a martial artist, then I would say I don't mind if it evolves or changes into something else, as long as it keeps the things that are of martial arts. But for example, there's a lot of old and ancient cultural customs that are part of like Japanese or Okinawan or Chinese that not even the Japanese or the Chinese practice those customs that could be part of the practice of a style that are just cumbersome in these days, because first of all, we don't have the patience, they don't make sense to us anymore. So some of those things could sort of, you know, get flushed out because of the culture and the modernization of our lifestyle. But what I do hate to see is when things change because somebody at the top who didn't really understand the whole thing changed it from his limited myopic point of view, and what he's doing is he's watering it down based on, you know, his or her whatever perspective. That to me is a big problem, because if you're going to change a style, you better know it intrinsically from top to bottom, be master level at it. And then in the old days, what the masters would do, they wouldn't change what was given to you, you would add to it, you would contribute something that was solely yours, and then you made it richer. So in other words, it just, you kept piling on more levels of expertise that each character or personality brought to it through their entire life experience. So the style became bigger and bigger because everybody added something to it. But, you know, I think sort of like Mozart and Beethoven, there's nobody around like them these days. It's very hard to find these days martial artists at that caliber that can truly contribute to the system that they received, and they leave it with something uniquely theirs that elevates it higher. Well, maybe a few generations have to skip before we have a few of those masterminds or geniuses in the world.
What a great chat. We've been meditating here in Toronto, especially one of my black belts and me, about the Yamamoto Tsunotomo quote, "It's bad when one thing becomes two." And relating that, talking about how martial arts, and it goes back to your idea of the bunkai, used to be this relatively complete, have to use perhaps too often, to many styles, systems, and bifurcations that lead to 1,000 different ways of doing something that once was just one thing. I don't know how that relates, but it feels like it does. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Punch Kick Choke Chat. Wow, what a start. It's such a pleasure to be back here now that we're back in the groove after summer breaks and little pauses. And we started back last week with Carlos Newton, and we're here again. It's my pleasure every week to introduce the senseis on the call with me, who are the co-hosts. I'm here with Sensei Randy Dauphin. He's a 7th degree black belt in Legacy Shorinjiryu, as well as Hakatsuru White Crane, and he's a 4th degree black belt in the Ido. I'm here with Sensei Nicolaus Suino, who runs the Japanese Martial Arts Center. He's an 8th degree black belt in Ido, as well as a 6th degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. And with Hanshigiri Legacy, who runs Legacy Shorinjiryu Karate Jitsu, as well as Hakatsuru White Crane in Canada. And he is a 10th degree black belt in both, as well as a black belt in Ido. How's it going, senseis?
Good.
It's
Amazing.
Good. I'm going to throw it to Sensei Dauphin to introduce our guest.
Good intro, Sean.
Thanks, Sensei.
Didn't even seem like you were reading that off of a piece of paper.
I wasn't.
Like you almost
I
memorized
actually
it.
practiced today.
All right. Well, listen, Kyoshi Lemus, it's my honor to introduce you today. And if I get anything wrong, please just correct at the end. Just if I misspeak, my pronunciations won't be perfect, but already super excited to be talking to Kyoshi Angel Lemus. He's an 8th Dan and actually the co-founder of the International Shorinjiryu Tode Zentokukai Association. That organization was founded in 1997 to preserve the old ways and teachings of, if Sensei Maletsky is listening to this, I know he's going to like it, the teachings of Chotoku Kyan, or some people say Kyan Chotoku, the small-eyed one, the old man, that are things that you will hear said, and also Zenryo Shimabukuro. Kyoshi Lemus runs the school. I'm sorry, I don't want to say this like the comedians say it, like Kane'ohe, Hawai'i. Kane'ohe, did I say that right, Kyoshi?
Kane'ohe.
Kane'ohe. So
Kane'ohe.
okay, thank you. So another really cool thing about Kyoshi Lemus is he's the founder of Bugeisha Magazine, which was recently reborn, and it's available online. And I know Robert's going to put it up if you want to get on it. I really encourage everybody to get on that magazine, read it, look through it. It's really about Japanese martial arts, Okinawan martial arts. I know other martial arts, but for those of you on this call, you're going to really enjoy it. So there it is, just popped up. Angel Lemus is the creator, as he was speaking of before, getting below the kata. He's the creator of the One in Minute Bunkai. It's a YouTube channel. You should go out and check it out. Smash it, like it, follow it. He started that channel as a way to share information, ideas only for members of his association, but now the channel has grown to over 13,000 subscribers. Please help us, Kyoshi, to get to that level, 13,000 subscribers worldwide, and he's had over 1 million views, which I think is outstanding. In addition to Okinawan arts, Lemus Sensei, as he's mentioned, Judo, he studied other arts like Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Chen style, Tai Chi Chuan. I always like to point out education. He's a graphic designer with experience in advertising and magazine production. I like to give a few of my own thoughts. Man, it's a small world. When I logged on tonight, I never thought we'd be talking about Kojo-ryu, but this is the first time outside of my association that I've heard anybody talk about that, which is super cool to hear somebody talk about Kojo-ryu. And And you can already tell from the thoughts that he's providing that he's a deep thinker, and there's really great value in the thoughts that he's providing already for posterity, because it's being taped. People can look at it later, right? Last thing I want to say is, Kyoshi Lemus, why would you want to work on a martial arts magazine? I know it's for all the fame and riches that you're getting from that magazine, right?
Of course.
Yeah, it's because you love martial arts, just like all the other people on this call. And thank you so much for logging on tonight and chatting with us. Can't wait to talk more. I've already written down like half a page of notes based on what you said. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, just a little bit of stuff for the people who are joining us tonight. If you're watching us not in real time on YouTube, we're so glad you're here. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share your favorite episodes. We really appreciate that. Just like Sensei Dauphin just said, we are very rich from this show, but we also like word of mouth as well. And if you're listening on the podcast, same thing. Subscribe, share it with your friends, show it to them while you're driving. But for those of you who are logged in tonight on the Zoom show, you get to be part of our living history, because at the bottom we got the chat button that Robert's going to light up for us. And so please ask your questions there, and we'll pass them on to the sensei, and it'll stimulate some of this great discussion that we're already having. And the other thing is, you're listening to Five Adults Chat, and some stuff might come up that seems a little, I don't know, racy. Maybe the swear words you don't like. And as Sensei Suino likes when I say, if you don't like that, you can just eat a big bag of dicks. Other than that, we're so happy you're here. We're so excited to get into the interview. So let's do it. Sensei Lemus, what was it like for you growing up, and what brought you into your first dojo?
That was a mama's boy. Very shy, out of shape, pear-shaped, very, very heavy in the lower body. So when I was 11 years old, my mom dragged me by the ears, kicking and screaming, and enrolled me in the judo class of my elementary school. And I was terrified. But the moment I set foot on the mat, it's just sort of like I found my calling. Back in the day, we used to have physical education class, and you had to change into these little uniforms, right? T-shirt and short shorts, and I have big trunk legs, and all the skinny kids with stick legs would make fun and point at me. So it's like the shaming that the young kids do. So that really messed with my mind. But then I found out that these trunk legs that I have work very well with something that requires a low center of gravity. So all the skinny kids couldn't do much with my legs, and I have very large feet. So when I would sweep them, they would go down really good. So that was my start. Just by chance, I have to thank my mom for forcing me to do that. But all she had to do was point the way. But once I got in there, man, I fell in love with the stuff, and I've never stopped. And
there's another guy on this call with large feet who can sweep you really well too.
Yeah. They help very much.
And so usually my follow-up to that question is, what brought you to your dojo and what kept you there? But it sounds like you found your place day one, and you just weren't ever going to not be in some version of a martial arts club.
Well, I'm always sort of envious of people who say, I met my sensei and I've been there for 50 years. That sounds like a great, tradition of consistency. That has never been my case, because I started in judo. I went through Kojo-ryu karate, Peter Urban style in Florida. I sort of went through that and got tired of the sports and the non-traditionalist essence of that style, and the personalities of that group were, kind of crazy sometimes. Then I went to study Shorinjiryu with Tim Rogers, and now we're talking getting into Seibukan, Shorinjiryu, Seibukan being the school founded by Zenryo Shimabukuro in Okinawa. So I finally found my Okinawan roots, training with an Okinawan style, and I'm still doing it to this day. But let's say that you have a main course for your dinner, but you like to go over there and try a lot of different desserts while you're eating dinner. That's sort of like my life story. I've studied Shorinjiryu all my life, but I've always just had side trips and picked up a little bit of this, a little bit of that, sometimes enough to earn rank in other styles and systems. But that sort of have been the story. So multiple styles of karate. I've tried rank in 2 Kobudo systems, but I've tried every single Kobudo system from Okinawa. Studied several Chinese arts, 2 types of Tai Chi, and I just love it all. I can't get enough.
So this is really, you said something in our intro that I wrote down immediately, and then now you're touching on it again. So you're in this judo, you've got this low center of gravity, you found your place in a world where your body didn't fit, and all of a sudden it does. Then you go check out, let's say, the Peter Urban Center, and you're showing guys in their 20s who outrank you that their style is a little ineffective against what you're doing. Why then did you not go back to more of a grappling art? And why then did you find Shorin and go, oh no, this is the one?
It wasn't that I was sort of teaching them. I was just surprising them that they weren't as good as they thought they were if they weren't playing under the rules and conditions that they were comfortable with. That's not to say that they didn't kick my ass all the way up and down the dojo.
Right.
I didn't really know blocking that well, or my footwork was different, because my whole idea of fighting is like a tiger. I just go straight into you, and I grab things while I'm there, and like an octopus, you just hug and throw the person or do stuff. So I didn't have great footwork and evasion and those type of things. So I eventually learned that game. But it was like a tournament every weekend, and it was sports karate, no applications whatsoever. It was a great foundation. I learned a lot of things, but the Peter Urban system didn't have the traditional Okinawan Goju-ryu katas. It was sort of forms that he developed and he created on his own. So again, I was always sort of looking, well, I like this stuff, but what about the Okinawan katas? Remember, in Miami, Florida, in the early 80s, there was no Okinawan Goju-ryu practitioner that I knew of. I mean, it didn't exist. So I'm practicing Goju-ryu. I've read that this is Japanese, Yamaguchi style Japanese Goju-ryu, and there's the original one from Okinawa. So I was always curious. I've never seen those forms, but it was just like an empty slate. But then I eventually got tired of just the whole sports mentality, and because, as I mentioned, I was looking for an authentic martial art, not a sport, that led me to Tim Rogers and Seibukan, because I knew that he was very, very traditional and very serious about his karate. I knew him from the tournament circuit because he would go from time to time, not because he was a big tournament guy, but he would go maybe just to introduce some of his students to participate in kata. But there was just something about him that I respected, but I was very scared of, because he's just a very mean-looking, intimidating fellow. But he treated me very well. And when I got tired of the whole thing, one day I went to his dojo. The sensei, can I practice with you? And he just said, go right in. And I never left.
And you found that started to give you the depth and some of that history that went back even to the bunkai type stuff you're talking about. Like, did that give you that, or did that lead you in the beginning of that?
What it gave me was a more solid foundation of mechanics, because the previous karate that I was doing was a little wobbly. You know what I mean? It wasn't a very well-oiled engine, and you could feel a lot of bumps in the road. And sometimes you try to brake and the car doesn't stop. It didn't give me the foundation. What I found in the traditional Shorinjiryu, it was solid. I finally learned how to make solid stances and use the hip and generate tremendous power. Very externally, physically well-developed style. And I was looking for that because that was a deficit. So that gave me allowed me to fill in those deficits that I had. But in my mind, well, it's a traditional Okinawan style. Now I'm part of the Okinawan lineage of family. But what I found out over the years, and it was no fault of my sensei because he was not given this information, it lacked in the true understanding of applications in bunkai. Now, one thing that I will say about him, to his credit, he's a 3-tour veteran of Vietnam, was a bounty hunter, worked for the DEA. So the man knew how to fight. So he taught us a lot about fighting, but it wasn't the sophisticated, deep knowledge of you can take, like, say, a middle block and explain it 10 different ways. So his was a very aggressive, pugilistic type of karate, which there's a lot of very good people. But as we have seen, a lot of the teachers that maybe my generation had weren't experts at bunkai, like people that study, and have had the chance to cross-train and fill in the gaps of knowledge in some of these arts, that over the years, there was a lot of training, but then it still gave me a fabulous, solid foundation. And then, even though I've continued, with that style, I have filled in those gaps by, I wanted to learn more about Aikido. So I took Aikido, I took, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. I never had the BJJ bug because I did judo when I was earlier. So to me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is good ground judo. So I've never had that bug to do that because I already went through that and did plenty of grappling in my younger age. And I found out that as I got older, it's not something I want to do, because every single person of my age who got the bug 6 months or a year later is like, oh, I busted my back and now I'm not going to do it anymore. So I'm glad I got it out of the way early. So.
Right on. Sensei Dofe, I know you had a question you want to chime in with?
Yeah, it's funny because it's a yin yang symbol, right, Kyoshi? Like, so Robert and Sean have been pushing me to do more of a ground game, and I'm having fun now as a 51-year-old, like getting on the ground and rolling around with people who are half my age as they try and choke me out and bust my knee and stuff like that. But I guess my question is for everybody. I have some thoughts. I like to use words very specifically now, and we say things like, even on this call, we've said things like style, and we've said system. We've said style and system. And I want to make a comment that some systems have a name and some styles don't work, right? Or don't work well. And I guess the comment that I want to make, and I'd like to hear from everybody, is, when you're so rigid that it just must function and look this particular way, but there's not anything behind that, right? Like Benson, you've been in places where they said, no, it's only a defense against the knife. It's nothing else. That's all it possibly can be. And that's why you move your hand that way. I guess when I say that, style versus system, or a system that has been named the style, what thoughts come to mind? I guess Sensei Kyoshi Lemus, we'll go to you last because we always like to do that. But Sean, maybe you first, Sensei Suino, and then Sensei Legacy, and then Kyoshi Lemus.
I'm happy to jump in. Sensei, can you clarify a bit for me what you mean by a system that becomes a style?
A system to me is something that deals with the situations that arise physically.
Yeah.
Right? Not the look of what you're doing. It's not about how you look when you're standing in the middle of the room. It's about how that functions when another person puts their hands on you or starts to close with you, or
okay, I get it now, and I know very much what I think. I'll go totally lateral into, I'm a car guy and I'm a Porsche guy, and Porsches look the way they look because their form follows their function. They figured out they want it to work a certain way, and it looks that way because of how they needed to make it work. And I've been part of the generation of martial artists with Hanshi Legacy that started before we were doing White Crane, and I've seen and been part of physically the shift to slightly shorter stances, and I've heard you say, Hanshi, it doesn't have to look pretty, it has to work. And so I think about how, and especially coming in as a white belt, I'm thinking about how it looks, and now all I'm thinking about is how it works. That's all I'm thinking about, is how does the system of these bunkai that strings together to make a kata, that string together to make a style, but really it's just, does this work? Whether it's at a basics level or a application through bunkai level. That's all I care about.
Thanks, Ben. Since Suino, where do you take that? Like, when I think of our system of swordsmanship, I think, it really works against other weapons and other swords and unarmed people, but it probably wouldn't work so great against a firearm from a mile away. Where do you take it?
I don't know that I still fully understand the distinction you're drawing between a style and a system. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess for me, a system is something that's going to, like as Sean said, it's primarily going to work, and your driving force is making it work with the sword, with the rifle, with your hands, with the throw. And your primary focus isn't making it look a certain way and then trying to adapt every scenario to how it looks, right? So I do my Shudo like this, so everything has to come at me from that perspective.
So you're saying that the flip side is that there's such a thing as a style where we do things this way, therefore our kata looks like this, therefore we're going to try to fight that way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we make fun of those styles on this call. There's an undertone of making fun of them often.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you know, the no touch throws and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are styles, but that can't be a system.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's the extreme example that lets you see how things can get away from you. I'm always amused by the guys these days that train in Musashi's sword style. It's one of the most effete, stylistic, dramatic styles that you can imagine. And to my eyes, and I'm happy to be proved wrong by somebody, to my eyes, it has no bearing whatsoever to the way that I imagine Musashi must have fought, which he was the most practical man in the world, right? He showed up 5 hours early so he could hide under a tree and kill the guy when he came out, right? You don't need to put on gauntlets and stand on one leg and hold a sword up in the air to emulate that. So yes, there is an absurdity to style when it gets taken to the nth level. Certainly, if someone said to me, in 3 days you have to go fight to the death against a whole bunch of people, then what I would care about is effectiveness only, right? Which is not to say I don't believe in style. I believe that style can help change who you are fundamentally. So I don't know that I have an answer to your direct question.
No, that's I just want thoughts, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's what I got. Random thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like the style of Iaido that we do, if somebody attacks me and I have a sword, I'm going to be able to pull, push, stab, cut from stable stances and deal with that situation. I've seen some other Iaido styles where I'm like, you got a name, but you got nothing else other than a name.
Well, isn't it fascinating how, for example, Iaido does so much to teach you geometry and physical structure, right? So if take all the combat out of it, it's still an amazing tool for learning how to move well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sense Legacy, as we're talking, any thoughts about styles and systems? And
well, let's there may be a bit of a shadow between, say, talking about classical karate and talking about practical karate, for instance. Yeah, you may have a style that shows it in a certain way, but that's their way of passing on, in those days, their secrets and all those things. But again, then there has to be a practice to make that all viable. You have to be able to actually do these things to save your life. So I would say that I got lost a little bit. I would say that part of the difference there is that you're trying to pass the style on in a classical way, and the other one is you're still trying to keep it a martial art as a killing art by doing it practically. So there's the style like Kojo-ryu and Shorinjiryu. They show you not physically the same, but physically to be fighting someone else. But the kata and the other is a way of passing it on.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So Kyoshi Lemus, before you start talking about the differences between the climate and the geography in Hawaii and the climate and the geography in Canada, which would influence the system and how it is effective, how do you feel about the things we were just talking about? Or what thoughts come to your mind?
Well, the way you defined it, I would tend to agree that that's a good definition. but I don't necessarily think that it has to be defined only that way, because we see styles and we see people that are basically cookie cutter repetitions of their style. Like, not that McDonald's is bad, but it's a cookie cutter. This dojo, they all do the same thing. And generally they all sort of move the same way. And generally they have the same sort of limitations, because they don't think outside the box. And if the box is really, really tight and small, like if they're just thinking about sports sparring, they're not going to know much more about self-defense, or those real situations where, you know, there's bleeding and breaking and screaming and those kinds of things. But I would tend to think also, you know, a system is, I would tend to think of it as a collection of things. Like you see, like the Krav Maga, to me, is sort of like a system. You know, they just smorgasbord of the best. And some of those guys are fantastic when you see some of the demonstrations, but nothing that they do is different. That it doesn't exist in traditional martial arts. They've just taken the ceremony and pomposity out of the restrictive martial arts way of practicing, and sort of like elevated to this effective elegance. But at the same time, a style can be a system, and a style can be very effective. But a system can also be very ineffective, because I have seen some people that, well, we don't do that traditional stuff you do, so they just, you know, they do a lot of YouTube sensei, and they think they know a lot, and all you have to do is just go to one of these meetups. When I first came to Hawaii, I didn't know anybody here, or very little, and there was a couple of meetups, and I went, and there's a bunch of people talking stuff, and it's like, holy cow, man, these people need help. From my perspective, it just was a very loosey-goosey thing, and they have very little foundation. And then you start talking to them, they didn't have a lot of traditional training. But bottom line is, if you see a fantastic martial artist that just excels, and you don't know anything about him, and he's just wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and then you find out he's been doing Shorinjiryu all his life, then it doesn't speak about the system or the style, it speaks about the person. So I've always believed that, you know, you have styles and they're all cookie cutter, and out of every single one of those dojo, you may have, hopefully the teacher, but you may have one or two people out of, I don't know, 100 students that you say, oh, those are the guys that get it. Those are the ones that I want to train with, and those are the ones that can fight. The rest of them are just, they're following a formulaic way of fighting. So for example, Ippon Kumite, you know, this for that. When he does this, you do this. You know, you can memorize some of these things, but that's not how you learn to fight. It has to be instinctive. You can't think about, you know, when he does this punch, you have to do this response. No, you do whatever comes out, because what if he steps with his right foot and throws a right punch? What if he steps with his left foot and also throws a right punch? That's two different things that are presented to you, because now you have different target areas and different balance on his perspective. And it changes whether you move to the right, to the left, back, forward. Do you go under? Do you go over the attack? So whatever you see the attacker doing, you have to respond. But I always explain this to my students, because I did ballroom dancing, okay? So you have the male leads the beautiful lady, and the lady takes the hints from the partner, you know, little things with a hand and your hand on the hip, and do they turn right? So when we fight, unless you go in first, if you're responding to the attack, you sort of have to, yeah, he attacks, and then you basically have to fill in the void that he gives you, because you have to fill it in like water. You know, sometimes you can't force it. You've seen in the movies, in the old 50s movies, where, you know, the James Cagney hits the guy and falls to the ground. I always hate when they have to pick the guy up, stand him up, so that they can punch him in the face again. That's forcing it. You know, and you see a lot of applications that are forcing the person to be the way you want them to be, so you can do this. You can do this application that's sort of you know, prescribed. So my philosophy is that you have to get out of painting by the numbers in your bunkai, and just whatever comes out, and then you'll learn to do it better by just doing a lot of that kind of free sparring, but in bunkai, where it's not prearranged. That's how you truly learn. And you'll get a black eye from time to time, but that's okay. And it's almost, I always say, it's like, jazz players in the 40s and 50s got tired of playing the same Benny Goodman song, and then they just went off into clubs and they just fed off each other, So martial arts and fighting to me is like jazz. You just have to make it up as it goes on. You have to come up with that response instantly, instinctively, without any previous thought. That to me is how you dance in this game.
I like that, Kyoshi. One of the things I'll share with you that since Sandoval, at a big seminar, I remember I'm working with a person and we're doing a certain move and something happens and I do this thing and the person's like, wow, that was really good. That hurt. That was super effective. And since Sandoval came along and I said, hey, Sensei, is this a bunkai? And he goes, let's see it. Right. So the thing happens, I do it. And he looks at the other person and goes, does that hurt you? Is that working? And the person goes, yeah, it does. He goes, that's a bunkai. That was his response to that. Yep, that's a bunkai.
No.
Yep.
No, if it works, it works. That's what matters. Somebody mentioned something about, is it pretty or does it look good? Is bunkai supposed to look pretty, right? You know how I look at it is, if it works, that to me is how it looks pretty, not how it looks pretty from, does it look like a picture perfect thing when you take a picture in a book and you have a sword or you have, something going on? No, to me, it's beautiful when you see the guy on the floor, with a well-executed application. That's how I see it pretty. It has nothing to do with whether it looks good from an aesthetics perspective. And to me, that's sort of like the fallacy of what we have with tournaments, because it's all about presentation. And I know some people are not going to like this, but I'm going to say it. To me, tournament is performance art, like gymnastics and floor dances. Those Olympic athletes are incredible, but they're doing a beautiful performance art, and they're being judged on the quality of the movements. But we see too much of judgment on fighting or tournament based on how you look to the judges.
You're in good company here, Kyoshi Lemus. Most of us, if not all of us on this call, the panel and the people watching agree with you on that. And it goes back to what Sensei Benson said, which is some people think Porsches look crappy, but the people who like to drive really fast and corner really good think they look beautiful because that's how they function well.
We've been lucky enough to have so many guests on the show who come from, different styles, different lineages, etc. Why does the name Kyan Chotoku or Chotoku Kyan resonate with you? That's a name that hasn't come up a lot on our show yet. We'd love to hear about your thoughts.
I mean, nobody really knows that much about him because none of us alive today met him. But he was 4'10". Imagine Zenryo Shimabukuro was, I think, 5'3" or 5'4". I mean, 4'10", that would be like a hobbit, okay? And he weighed maybe 90 pounds, and he is one of the great, karate men of Okinawa, supposedly, right? But it's somebody who overcame adversity. He was a very sickly young kid, there's the same story. And his father taught him some martial arts, but parents teaching their kids martial arts is not a good thing because it's too close. So he took him to Japan. He learned some stuff over there, and then because his father was a steward to the king of Okinawa, so he had really good doors opening for him. And Kyan was able to train with Matsumura, Maeda, Oyadomari, Maeda Peichin. He was able to train with some of the greatest figures from his previous generation. So he sort of collected a lot of information because he had a lot of teachers. And what I find funny is that after the 1920s, when karate became popular, it was looked down like, if you were a student of somebody in Okinawa and you went to train at some other dojo, it was a bad thing. Yet everybody before them, they were bouncing around as much as possible. So it's just how the whole thing sort of became paternal but that's one of the unique things about Kyan is that, like so many of his contemporaries, had a lot of different teachers, and And supposedly he never lost a fight. But, you know, whatever that means, I don't know, because we weren't there. We didn't see the fights. And there's always the, like, for example, did Musashi win because he was the greatest swordsman ever? Or did he win because the foes that he fought were that bad? You know, more than likely he was a very good swordsman, but, you know, there's always, you know, what happened during that day at that time. I'm sure he was a great swordsman, but the fights that they had in those days, you know, who knows what, you know, how they went down or what happened.
So we ask all our guests 10 questions. It's your time for the 10 questions.
Okay.
And we ask that you answer as impulsively as you can, but then feel free to expand on your answers as you wish. So Sensei, what is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
The one that you don't have to block that hits him at the same time he would have hit you. And there's a few cool ones. Don't be there.
What is the most, pardon me, who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
I would say Tim Rogers. He's given me a lot, not necessarily everything I know, but he gave me a foundation. He gave me a way to think during a time when I was young and dumb, and he steered me in the right direction to think, to be honorable, to train hard, don't do stupid stuff, and he opened my eyes to the reality of if you go out there and you look for a fight, you may end up getting killed, because his way of teaching you that was taking you to the brink of having to go to the hospital that night, but he never took you over that level. But in other words, he held you over that precipice, and you know you're looking down at 1,000-foot fall, but then he would bring you back. But being held there for a while scared the crap out of you. That's how intimidating he was. So it was like a reality check. So
Wow.
that had a huge influence in my life. So he was like one of the pillars of my foundation.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
Jeez. That's a really open-ended question, because are you talking about Japan, Okinawa, China, Europe? You know, there's a lot. That's a really, really tough one. The most influential martial artist of all time. I may have to come back to you on that one.
Cool. We'll circle around at the end. What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Continuing to learn things I do not yet know, or things that I have seen others do that I can't do, and getting to the point where I can do them. Because one of the things that I detest is conformity. I'm playing around with some Kung Fu guys right now and learning a lot of things from them. And one of the things that makes me think that if I continue to do the 8 katas of Kyan the rest of my life, that's great. That's a great foundation for discipline, but I'm limited to those 8 katas of Kyan and whatever knowledge is in there. But there's a lot of stuff that doesn't exist in karate that's out there floating around. So I don't want to get stuck in just knowing those things, because I want to learn new things, new skills, new abilities, and also the mental maturity that comes with those things through the hardship of the physical labor to do them, because that lifts you up mentally, because then you get more confident in your skills. And let's face it, you need to have confidence in your skills. You can't pretend that.
I'm just writing down a phrase you used there that's exciting to me. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
I wouldn't want him to say what took you so long. I would like him to say, you know that guy, the 17th century teacher that you wanted to learn for? He's over there on dojo number 3. Go. So I would still be looking for training beyond. I'm not going to sit around and count the lilies in the field.
Do you have a favorite film and television martial artist?
Tony Zhao from Ong Bak. If you guys haven't seen Ong Bak, the Thai boxer, Jesus Christ, that's an amazing person. Donnie Yen. A lot of the Chinese martial artists, to me, are the ones who you see in the movies today that are martial artists are just incredible people.
That was Sensei Copeland's favorite too. That's who he said.
Yeah, but check out Tony Zhao and look for the movie Ong Bak, Ongbak. It will blow your mind because this guy he has no wires. He does all his crazy stuff, and the fights in that movie are just insane. Makes you just want to get up and join him.
I know you've touched on this a little, but who's a martial artist you'd like to train with in all of history, whether they're living or dead?
Jesus Christ.
Love this story.
The famous Italian Fiore dei Liberi, who wrote the treatise in the 1400s of his European martial arts. That would be somebody fantastic because he taught everybody in that era. Would have loved to get together with Miyagi, Kyan, Sakugawa, Matsumura, of course Musashi, some of the great jiu-jitsu masters of Japan. Jesus, the list goes on.
If everybody in the world could get the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what gift would they be getting?
An insatiable hunger for knowledge that just keeps me from just sitting down and becoming a couch potato, because I see too much of that.
Greatest achievement and greatest regret?
I don't really see any great achievements in my martial arts career because I just think myself as a student. Yeah, I've gotten some high rank and that kind of stuff, but I just see those like stepping stones. I'll tell you one thing. Probably the greatest sensei I've had in my life is my wife Judy, who's a marine biologist. She has changed the way I think because she's the most logical, skeptical person I have ever known. You will never win an argument with her because she destroys whatever argument you bring. So that has helped me a lot with the way I think. And that's a really good tool, especially in today's day and age where there's just so much craziness and misinformation going around. But it's helped me with just my general maturity as an adult. And then that also helps me with my martial arts because I know better how to dissect and analyze and see what's there and what I don't want, definitely, and then the things that I do want. Because you don't want to be led astray because somebody looks good or something looks fancy. You really want to get to the bottom of things. So when I'm evaluating a system or a teacher, I think I got a good head to sort of see what's going on there. And then also figure out, is this the type of person that I would want to train with? Because there's some idiots out there that are fantastic that, I don't want to have a beer with. So kind of like the whole thing.
Greatest regret?
Maybe that I didn't start in the right place earlier on when I was younger. But I really don't have anything that's like monumental that I did that was so bad. I live in Hawaii, so here's where I ended up. So and I wouldn't be here if I didn't meet a marine biologist. So that has a lot to do with sort of like where my life has led. So she got a job here, so here I am in Hawaii. So that's not too bad. But there's nothing really that I would say is the greatest regret. I've been very, very lucky being at the right place at the right time. When I lived in Southern California, a big hub of martial arts down there. So I got to meet a lot of people, and I got to train with some fantastic teachers. Some of them were, casual seminars, and some of them I went to train for a year or two and got a lot out of it. Coming back to the magazine Bugeisha, during 1996 to 1998, boy, that opened up so many doors for me, because I would get these articles from people. Hey, publish my article. So all of a sudden I'm getting pictures and old photos and historical stuff from people all over the world. So imagine, for me, that was like, a kid in a candy store. So it opened up a lot of doors, to the point that when I decided to do the magazine again was it last year, most of the original authors just said, hey, we've been waiting. We're ready to, write stories. So, and then again, right now, we live in a much technologically advanced era of communications than 1996. It's so easy right now to do all this stuff. Again, it's still opening doors for me. I just went to Spain for a month, and I was able to train with a couple of people that I didn't know before. So just by doing the magazine, it was fantastic.
I mean, I'm sure some of us can relate, and we can come back to that, influential martial arts question if you want or not. But let's go into your magazine a little right now. Let's talk about, on the hiatus, like, why did it feel important, and what are some of the articles that have come your way that really make you sit up or teach you something or that excite you?
Well, as a graphic designer, I do websites, and then I have a couple of clients like Don Warner, old Goju guy from Canada, has a gigantic online store, and he publishes books, videos, and all kinds of stuff. So I do a lot of work for him, where I publish the books that he's going to publish on Amazon, the Kindle Amazon services. And then I thought, Jesus, it's so easy to do that these days. I should be able to do Bugeisha all on my own. Because before, it was a publisher, a copy editor, a couple of other people, and then I did all the design. But now I'm doing it all single-handedly. So it's much easier because of technology, the speed of the computers, the programs, and also my expertise. So I just said, hey, let's bring it back. If it fails, it fails. But so far, it's like a year and a half now. It's a quarterly. So going on issue number 7 since it came out. So I get all kinds of stuff, and sometimes somebody just sends me something out of the blue, and it's something, no, I don't want to publish this, or something like, wow, I didn't even know this guy was around. The biggest thing that I'm looking for these days is traditional stories. It doesn't have to be that you have to be a 10th dan. You could be a shodan if you have a good story to tell, or if you have some good ideas. It's worth looking at, because we want to explore everybody's input, whether you're a man or a woman. There's equality in martial arts as far as I'm concerned. So, but also, looking for a good cover subject. That's always a big deal. So cover subjects usually tend to be a little older, a little more experienced. So if you know anybody, let's talk.
Awesome.
But it's been very easy, because before, the magazine was done traditionally. We would have to buy a whole bunch of copies. We have to store them in somebody's living room.
Sure.
And then if you subscribe, we have to lick a stamp and send it to you. And the idea was to make some money through advertising, but martial arts advertising is terrible. Martial artists tend to be cheap when it comes to advertising. And there's not a lot of companies out there when you really think about it. They're mom and pop shops. So the opportunity to publish this magazine right now through Amazon is that I put a PDF together, I upload it to Amazon, and that's it. You order it, they ship it to you. Canada, Europe, all of Asia, Australia. The only place it's not available is in South America as a printed copy, but you can get it in the Kindle reader digital.
Great. So, use us as advertising real quick. So for somebody who might not be online with us right now and able to look at the link, someone who's driving or whatever, just remind them the name, where they'd go to order it, how they'd decide if it was going to be print or Kindle.
Well, it's basically www.bugeisha, bugeisha.net. When you go there, you'll see the latest issue. You can look at the back issues and see all the ones that came previously, which you can order. There's also a link for what I call the legacy issues. That was issues 1 through 7 from 1996 to 1998. You can order them individually because some people bought a few or the dog ate one. So, some people ask, hey, can I get issue number 2? And so they're available also. But those were all black and white on the inside. The covers were color. And then I put together, the first thing I ever did, I put together a compilation of 450 pages, which was issues 1 through 7, all collected in a book that's about 1.5 inches thick. So that's an option. If you just want to get the compilation, they're all there. But the new issues now, they're 8.5 by 11, full color glossy covers, and the inside is the high quality Amazon offering for nice white pages with full color.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. And, I'm excited to check that out myself. We had a question come in here, and I want to, I'll actually start with you, and then we'll go around the horn. Hanshi, Sensei Suino, Sensei Dofan. I might even chip in a bit, but it's a good question from Robert Schlumsky, who's running our show tonight, part of the show. How do you feel about Kyan Shotoku's encouragement of students to consume alcohol and other colorful activities? Does that align with testing your art and being practical?
No, I wouldn't say that it has any bearing on the art itself, because you could be a Shaolin monk and never hurt a fly, and you could be a fantastic martial artist. I think that's one of those colorful phrases that could have been taken out of context after 5 bottles of sake in a bar. We've all said a lot of things that we regret after a drinking session. Also, it was a different culture and time, Back then, men had things on the side that were acceptable. Today, no, right? So, but no, I don't think that if he said that you have to do this in order to be able to be a good martial artist, no, I don't believe that. As far as can you hold on a few drinks? Nothing wrong with that, but the other colorful stuff, that's up to everybody.
Yeah. Right on. Hanshi Legacy, trying substances, colorful activities. Where does that fit in with training and, practicality of training?
I don't know. It's life. Training is training. That's all I'm not going to say anymore. I'll pass.
Right on. Sensei Suino?
Well, maybe this is a different direction, but as martial artists, we're interested in things. We're curious. We're courageous, right? Courageous enough to step on the mat. Often courageous enough to step into tournaments or to handle adversity when other people maybe aren't brave enough to do it. And part of that is being adventurous, going out into the world and sometimes trying things. You can learn a lot from everything in the world. And some of those activities, some of everything is colorful, right? But it's also true that some things can go wrong. As Lemus Sensei said, you can be a Shaolin monk and you can also be a prodigious drinker, as one of my heroes was. Yamaoka Teshu was a monstrous drinker. And also died very early, but he was also an extraordinary martial artist. So, right, you can run the gamut, but man, a thirst for life in all its forms seems to be a characteristic of great martial artists.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dofan?
Listen, I'd like to have a drink with Kyan Chotoku. I was in Sensei Suino's house a couple weeks ago, drank all of his beer, and then went out, got some more beer and put it in his fridge, and his wife complained and said, trying to get the beer out of this house. You keep bringing it here. So anyway, I'd like to have a beer with Kyan Shotoku. But I think the spirit of that, Sean, is pressure testing your martial art, right? So I think if you want to think about it, like, you know, drink, carouse, do these things that maybe make you feel a little uncomfortable so you can experience what it's like to use your martial art, right? And again, you can't do that today. Back then you could, like, you always have to take historical context. Everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket now. You don't need to do that stuff. Like, Tosu climbed up the tree and then jumped out of the tree and apparently broke somebody's neck and buried a sai in somebody's body. If I climb a tree, I pull my cell phone out and I call the police, and then hopefully they come in time. And if not, my training is going to help me. So I guess that's where I go with it. The spirit of what Kyan Shotoku, in my opinion, is, you know, pressure test your martial arts and make sure it's going to work for you, so that when you find yourself in these situations, yeah. And there's no problem back then if you're a person of stature who drinks and goes out and fights and carouses.
Right.
There's no consequence for that as there is today.
Just real briefly, Robert, you know, a thing that I think about is a bit of what Sensei Suino said, is just the idea that, you know, I want to live fully. I want a taste of this world. And one of the things the martial arts gives me is actually the ability to be vulnerable in places where other people can't, because they might be afraid. So I can walk into certain arenas or certain places and have. And so sometimes those things take over though. And then, so for me, it always comes down to, I only say personally, do whatever you want, and then make sure that the training's always at the center. Because if it impinges on the training, now it's no longer practically helping you in any way, shape, or form. It just becomes about that thing. But Hanshi, I won't remember the term you once said, but it's one of my favorite things you've ever said in your kitchen, where you just said, I mean, we're not crazy, but we're all a little smoke rolling over the edge. And I think there's something exciting about choosing a life as, I mean, the second word is artist. You know, you're choosing to create things in the moment and see things and in a different way, perhaps. And anyways, that can be like riding a wild bronco sometimes, but it's never not worth it.
Hey, listen, Sean, I think when Sensei Legacy and I went to Panama, got off the airplane, and we were going to the tournament venue, the guy on the bus said, see that pink building over there? Don't go there. That's where Roberto Duran is from. Very dangerous there. Don't go there. As soon as we got to the place, the tournament venue, we went to where we got in a taxi cab and we went there, and we were like, all right, where Roberto Duran was. I think Kyan Shotoku would have patted us on the back and said, good for you guys for going there, I think.
Quick question for you, Sensei Lemus. You know, I've chatted with the other hosts on this a few times about this, but it's not the most interesting question, but it comes up with you for me because you talk about the old school bunkai and the applicability and that depth. And I love the way you talk about that. What do you think of the modern day mixed martial arts? What do you think that's done or taken away from martial arts in general?
I don't think it's taken anything away. It's more like a good reality check because those guys are fighting. They're just one hair breadth away from killing each other. And they've taken techniques that you normally don't see in kata or applications from any martial art, whether it be aikido, judo. But every once in a while, you see somebody do something. It's like, oh my God, he just did a kotegaishi or something, or he did a judo uchimata or whatever. But there's a certain excitement to see these guys. I personally don't spend too much time looking at them. It's just not my bag, but I enjoy a good knockout. Okay.
Right.
But the biggest problem that I see with that, it's the carrot of quick glory with no sense of devotion to training that I see the youth. Because in my experience, what has happened ever since started with the first octagon fight back then, is, generations of young people have just left the dojos and gone off into that direction. It's very hard to get students these days, especially, people in their early teens, late teens, and early 20s. They all want to be the next MMA champion, or they think that they can fight without going through ceremony. There's a lot to the ceremony and to the things that teach you patience in the dojo. It's not a quick fix. It's not a quick answer. But the problem that I see too is that it's like a football player. You get drafted at age 20, you have 4 or 5 years. You don't see 40, 50-year-old football players. They're gonna fizzle out, get an injury, and so better have a good accountant. And what I see happening with this is like, it's like a professional boxer. Unless you're a Mike Tyson where you can have a long run, most of them are, they don't last too long, or they get injured. And I see a lot of people getting injuries. But then again, it's like the martial artist, the karate guy who went to a dojo that all they did was tournament. And then they went off to college and there's no more tournament. So they quit because there's no purpose to doing martial arts, because it was all about the competition and the fame and the glory and the piece of plastic, or in some cases, a purse. I've known a lot of people who are no longer involved in the dojo, and they just, well, why should I practice? I can't compete anymore. It's like, holy cow, what a bad way or empty way to look at martial arts if that's all there was to it. So I kind of see the MMA and these things draining the youth that used to come into our dojos. So I see that traditional martial arts are shrinking, and I see a lot of it here in America. I've been to Europe, and there's like a fervor over there for doing traditional karate and traditional arts. They still have the MMA and stuff over there, but over there it's just lovely to see how still in love they are with wearing a gi, going to a dojo, and putting in some years. And over here, it's like I haven't had a student who was under 35 like in the last 10 years. It's like pulling teeth. And most of the dojos in my organization have shrunk almost into nothing. And that's what I hear from a lot of other groups. It's just the old timers just keep hanging in there, but we're gonna die and we're gonna take it all with us, and we had nobody to leave, pass it on to. So that's where I see the biggest problem is. But I do put some of the blame on the new fads but it's the nature of the beast. Different culture, different society, and kids of today is the now instant gratification mentality.
And you just used a word that throughout our conversation hasn't been your favorite, including beforehand when even you didn't want to be necessarily referred to as Kyoshi because you don't love ceremony. But in talking about that, that's the first time I've heard you talk about ceremony as essential. So when don't you like ceremony? When isn't it necessary? And when does it matter?
I see it okay when it's merited, but not when it's abused. When somebody uses that belt to get respect or to come across as somebody that they're not, and it's kind of the same thing as cult leaders who lead everybody astray and into bad situations. There's just too much of that.
Yeah.
The belt colored matters not. It's what you do with it. You're the same person whether you wear shorts, a black belt, or as my sensei calls it, the clown belt. That's the candy cane. We call it the clown belt. You're the same person, but some people are not the same person until they put it on. Then they turn into a peacock. And that's the part that I think none of us like that stuff. And we see too much of it.
Well, for sure. And where's it good? Where do you like it? Where do you think it's needed?
When you're doing something traditional, like a promotion or a celebration or some kind of demonstration where people that are coming up the ranks see the old guys come out, and you see somebody wearing a different color belt, and you expect you're going to have a really good quality demonstration. So that visual aspect of here comes somebody that better put out what you expect that belt to show. In that sense, I think it's inspirational to see that. But I don't see it as like I need to ruffle my feathers. It would be for those that are under to look at that belt and maybe look up to what it represents. Not for me necessarily, but for what the belt means in the art. So again, it's respect the, you know, what the belt represents, not the personality underneath, you know, the gi.
Thank you, Sensei. As I say way too often on this show, sadly, time is real. I'm shocked we're at 10 right now. So that's time for us to do what we call round the horn. And what that means is we start with Hanshi Legacy and we go through the ranks, including myself, and we say a little something about our time with you. And then the last word will go to you before we do a little housekeeping. So Hanshi Legacy, what do you want to say about our time tonight?
Well, I really enjoyed it because we're a little bit back in the Shorinjiryu era, and I like how you'd like to do the pure martial art. It's I had something to say earlier, but it was about why you like the old martial arts better. It's because in those days they defended their lives. Nobody did stuff like all the unnecessary stuff. They only learned, hey, 4 blocks, 4 kicks, a punch, and a judo. Let's just say karate. That's all you need. And then as it goes along, people try to put their stuff in it, and it takes you further and further away from what you just need, you know, as that martial art. So I really enjoyed that part of it. Then it was nice to talk about the Kojo brothers. Again, you made me think about my sensei. And I think we all agree on the classical martial arts. Be nice to talk about this again sometime. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino.
Man, what a rich tapestry this conversation has been. We've been around a lot of places, right? From judo to goju to shorin, and then Chinese martial arts. Talking about Bugeisha, the magazine, and Ongbak. I just feel like this was a rich buffet of topics, barely getting into it. There's one thing that really resonated and kind of brought back a lovely memory for me when you mentioned at one point that martial arts in execution is like jazz, right? It's almost like improvisational jazz. Each generation adds to it. And I had a judo student years ago who took over one of the dojos I ran, Jeff Friedless, and he was, to this day, the most incredible judo student I've ever had. Within a year, he was as good as anybody I've ever trained. Just phenomenal. And he ended up being killed. And at his eulogy, before he died, he was instructor to a SWAT team in the town that we had our dojo. And so the whole SWAT team came to the services. And in the eulogy, one of the guys talked about how doing martial arts, doing judo with Friedla Sensei was like listening to somebody at a very high level play improvisational jazz, right? So when you said that, it was just this wonderful moment of bringing back a memory of a martial artist whom I loved and who was also incredible, and how much influence he had on the world. So thanks for that, inadvertent, but nevertheless, thank you so much for bringing that back to me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dauphin.
Listen, Kyoshi, I know you don't like those titles, but I'm going to use it anyway. You can scold me later. You can scold me later when we meet in person, because I'm sure we will. When Sensei Suino mentioned your name, he sent a list about our podcast. Your name was the one that I jumped on right away. It was mostly because of Bugeisha Magazine, and I just thought, oh, this would be a good opportunity for Punch Kick Choke Chat. when we did our first call and we chatted, I was like, this is going to be so much more than that. Like, and that's come across through this call, so much more than just an opportunity for some publicity for Punch Kick Choke Chat, right? Which is great, or opportunity for Bugeisha Magazine, which we can work together on that forever. Like, so it was so good to listen to you talk about Kojo-ryu, that style, Kafu Koju, just hearing those names, having the opportunity to talk about Sensei Legacy's instructor. It's never happened before on this call, and it's actually never happened. I can't think with anybody else other than you. You're the first person who's come on. It made me feel great right from the beginning, because that's what we started talking about. I liked when you talked about the old systems and living under conditions where your life depended on it and you had to depend on yourself, right? No cell phones, no lights, no cars driving around, no hospitals. People should think about that stuff, that's how these arts were propagated, and they were propagated so you could defend on yourself. Today, I think sadly, a lot of people depend on everybody else to take care of them instead of them taking care of themselves. Again, Peter Urban, read those books. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that. Like, it's nice to think about like these crazy karate people and you thinking, this is all I got. I'm going to grab them and I'm going to slam them with the earth. That was fun to envision. So thanks for that. You don't take away, you add to it. Right. In martial arts, you're not taking away something to replace it with what you want. You're just adding something to it. And if it has value, it'll endure. That was a really good thing to hear you talk about. And I think something that everybody should talk about. That you were shy, your mom dragged you into it. She made you stay. That's amazing. It made me think about my mom, who didn't want me to do martial arts and wanted to keep me out of it, because she thought I was going to be too aggressive and too much of a ruffian. And Sensei Legacy will remember that when I got my yellow belt, my mom marched across the floor to him at the head table and said, you know, I'd like to see my son once in a while, right? So, and then Sensei Legacy said, well, let's just agree to share him, right? Like that's what he said. When you said that, that's what it made me think about. I liked when you talked about the rules and conditions of fighting in judo and karate determine how you're going to do it and maybe how you think about it. I liked when you said you did a pugilistic style of karate where there was bleeding, breaking, and screaming. I can relate to that a lot. And that the martial arts box can't get too small. If it's too small, right, then it gets constrained. Fighting has to be instinctive, not ippon kumite. Ippon kumite maybe is good for some things, but it's not instinctive. Forced applications that are prescribed are not good. Whatever comes out, comes out. And then in your 10 questions, effective move, the one that you don't have to block to land. I relate to that on a high level. I like that you said Tim Rogers was the most influential person. Train hard, be honorable, don't look for fights. Those are 3 words that everybody could take forward. Man, nobody said this before, Kyoshi. Excited about the next 5 years, learning new things, right? Like just learning new things. That's what excites me about my next 5 years too, right? Like just doing some old things, but learning some new things. Again, another thing you said that nobody else has said, the benefit of training, an insatiable hunger for knowledge. That's great. Everybody needs to have that in martial arts. I also like that you said, some idiots out there who are fantastic, I wouldn't even have a beer with them, right? Like, yeah, I'd go with you. We'd have a beer somewhere else. That's amazing. The carrot of glory with no devotion to anything, right? The carrot of glory, MMA, the carrot of glory with no devotion. only competing, that's an empty way of looking at the art. If that's all you have is only competing and you're not going to continue on, it's an empty way. Honestly, Kyoshi, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much. It's been so enjoyable. Thank you so much for coming on here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sensei. You know, I get to chip in so much during the chat, but one of the things I wrote down when I interrupted myself there was just, you were talking about what you're going to be learning, and you just really stressed the hardship of the physical training that you're looking forward to. And it's just such a reminder, even though we all train here all the time, of we learn this stuff through the physical, you know, and then we think about it after. But if we're not training, you can't watch the video and get it. You can't read the book and get it. It's part of it, but it ain't it. And it was just such a nice reminder. And I just like that word hardship. You know, training is hard if we're pushing ourselves, and it doesn't have to be every day, but it was a nice reminder, and I really appreciate that. And it's just been such a delightful chat. I really meant what I said. I couldn't believe it was 10 o'clock. I felt it was 9 o'clock. And now we throw the last word to you, whatever you want to say, and then we'll take it home with next week's guest.
Well, first of all, thank you all for this opportunity. I mean, you guys as a panel are amazing. The gamut of different arts and experiences. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And first of all, I love the name of this podcast, because the word choke, you don't hear that too much. You know, coming from karate or judo background originally, to me, the word choke was like bread and butter. Going into the karate world over the decades, you know, I've trained with other people, and you know, I'm the vice president of my organization. None of those guys know how to choke, you know. So for me to just hear the word choke intermixed with punch and kick is fantastic, because that's like part of what most people don't know. And choking was one of my favorite things to do. I received a lot of it. I was choked out multiple times where I was literally blacked out. But I gave back a little bit here and there. But it's just to me, it's an amazing thing and a skill to have. So I appreciate the name. I mean, there's so much we can go on. You did ask me a question that I was not able to answer. Was it the greatest martial arts that ever lived?
The most influential, and why?
Well, the question as such assumes that I know every single one. So that's impossible, because I don't know. And there's so many, but I will give you a partial answer. And that would be Achilles from the Greek times. I've read about his story. I love the movie with Brad Pitt. And if that guy, as portrayed in that movie, actually lived and was such a badass, I would say he would be a runner-up as the greatest martial artist that ever lived, because what he shows in that movie is just pretty badass. So that would be a partial answer.
Love it.
First time ever. Nobody's ever said that before.
Well,
Cool.
one of the things, you know, you mentioned about that big, gigantic double-handed broadsword. I practice European historical martial arts, so I have a deep passion for European fighting arts, and I love the whole thing about the Vikings fighting the English in the 800s. I follow all that stuff, and I love everything having to do with swords and shields and battle lines and all that. So I do have a great affinity for that sort of combative aspects too. But I'll leave you with one thing, that when you talk about my hunger for knowledge, is that I find that if I restrain myself to just my Shorinjiryu, because I know the limits of it right now, I know that I've already reached the point where there's nothing beyond it that I know that's available out there in the world. I think I've reached that limit. Now, I would be happy if anybody could tell me that I'm wrong, but you would have to then convince me that I'm wrong. But within what I can figure out, I've reached the limit of the knowledge of what that karate has to offer. So for me, if I continue to do that, it would be like if you had the opportunity to repeat your senior high school year for the rest of your life. Think about that. Every sophomore, junior coming up the ranks would see you as, oh, that guy, he aces his tests all the time. He's the smartest guy in the world. And you would be like a rock star, but you're just repeating your high school year every year. You know the material perfectly. but you don't know that there's junior college and there's a university and there's a, you know, a master's degrees, PhD degrees, postdocs, and then, you know, you have, you know, your research, and then you win the Nobel Prize. I mean, repeating the same thing endlessly without learning anything new would be fine if the art tells you up front, this is what we have, and there's nothing more beyond it. And if you're happy mastering this, you can do it the rest of your life. And I find that some people are happy just doing that, and they're perfectly good. Not for me. I'm always looking. So this is why I always have to go across the ocean and knock on the door and study a different martial art, because I always find that there's other things that are not in my native martial art that enrich me. And when I say that the hardship of training is good, is because I'm studying things now that do not exist in the Okinawan karate that I practice, that are challenging and kicking my butt. So these are kicks and combinations and timings and things that are just insane that I never saw before. And it literally, I had to take off my belt and just start as a white belt because I couldn't do these things. But with the passage of time, you get good at them. But again, it's like anything else. You just have to practice and study, and you know, you'll achieve whatever you want to achieve. But you can't just do it without putting in the hard work.
Thanks, Sensei. We really appreciate that. It's been such a pleasure. So I want to make sure before I throw it to you, Sensei, that I don't make my mistake of last week where I forgot to thank the people who run our show behind the scenes: Robert Schlumsky, Justin Shea, Andrei Sedashev, and Alden Adair. And my apologies for last week, because I never want to forget the people who are part of the show and who we wouldn't be able to bring it to you without them. Sensei, what do we got coming up?
Those people all love you, Sean. They don't take any offense. They've trained with you for a few decades, and they don't take any offense to that. I just want to remind everybody, go to bugeisha.net, download that magazine. You're going to like it. You're going to learn something. Yeah. And then go to YouTube and go to the 1 Minute Bunkai channel, smash that like, learn something that you can make. Sensei Legacy says, go out and make karate better, right? So if you go do that, you download that magazine and read something, or you go to that YouTube channel, then you're going to go out and make karate better. So next week, it's us.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's us. We get to just chat, the 4 hosts. We get to talk. Yeah, I always love it. I know Sensei Legacy has topics. He writes them down and he drives us to talk about those things. Other things we can talk about, since Suino and I just were up in the mountains of Wyoming. Lots of great things. One thing I can tell you right now is that there were never any 4 swordsmen on a Wyoming mountain like the 4 that went up that mountain a few weeks ago. So history was made. And I'm happy to talk about the experience of standing waist deep in a alpine mountain lake with Sensei Suino, watching him fly fish while the 2 of us were pulling fish in, and a storm is coming over the mountain and we're trying to rush to get the fish cleaned so we can get back to the camp and eat them. Next week, that's the shit we're going to be talking about. I know it. Yeah.
Love it. Thanks, Sensei. I really look forward to the host chat. I'm so grateful for our time tonight. Be safe, everybody, and we'll see you in a week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for coming.